Well, it's now my honor to present to you the son of General Vang Pao, Chee Meng Vang.
Good morning. I'm going to begin doing something a little bit unorthodox, but traditionally we do it in Hmong custom. I'm going to invite a few people to join me down on the floor and pay tribute to the late Hmong leader and our father, General Vang Pao. So I'm going to ask President Ashwa, Dr. Sailong, President Jamblong, and the two older brothers, Zhongzhe and Jingzhen, the
Cho nên quân cái có cho nàyทหารในตำรวจข้าราชการว่าเชื่อเดือนโตลึกลับก็จะต้องใช้บ่โยนได้จนตัวนี้จะคุยตัวนี้จะจุดจี้ป้าเจ้าอย่าลืมนอโหกับผมพูดตู้จอตู้นอยิ่งนุ่งเจ๋งจริงว่าโหซึ่งวิสการจริงก็เป็นเรื่องนอโตสิ้นลาโปcái cho tiền gì cho chúng ta sẽ nhau thế cho tàu giải cái chuyện gì này cho họ thì cho nên phun cọ cái kia để chúng nó cái tàu họ nó cho nên phun chơi có cho đại tá hạt nhìn xong nhìn chế nhìn nó chỉ lo nhìn chế này cho được lần đó non đó hồ cái có cho đại tá hạt lần đó non đó hồ con nó để chơi con nữa để cho có cho đại tá hạt nàyตำรวจและข้าราชการเราchỉ cho cóกลัวเลยวันนี้โตcho cái chuyện gì đi sang du lịch lần đó con nó để cái một cái dạng nó hoàn toàn nó biết cho nên bốn lúc ba nào giờ lúc ba chỉ chơi lòng được lúc cũng có tu cho và giờ có giờ tu chỉ chơi lúc xưa nó giờ bắt đầu là số giờ tu chữ lúc cũng tu cho nó nói nó chỉ chơi thì bây giờ 我跟我忙着做，一路呢我找，路这里我这个包，到在这了做，都让这些呢，有的路呢好路跟我都做，被没路办呢找到个我自己，也叫么，找到个叫那ทหาร，叫ข้าราชการ叫一直到ข้าราชการ叫专注力，我那时候到陆拉部了，也找这个这，有的他个我自己天呢，叫那ทหาร了么在路办呢，叫母语就了呢在那分了。
My wife, Maya, and my sister-in-law, Nina. If you two can join us up on stage too, so everybody can see the family of General Vang Pao. Thời cho những trồng nghề trồng gì, cho cứ cho ti, cho nên cho trả cho không cho dư. Chú sen giờ bây giờ cô tục trò. Đợt cái chỉ này còn bạc có thì cái tích chỉ cả nó là giờ tụ trò xí rồi qua nhất đầu tích chỉ lo. It thought that how make a tụ trò. All the veterans who served in the United States Armed Forces and those that were part of the CIA Secret Army, please stand so we can acknowledge and applaud each and every single one of you for your service to our country. They should have put data right. Thank you, you may be seated. Although the governor is not here, because we know he's running state affairs, I'd like to acknowledge the Honorable Governor Tony Evers. To Senator Jerry Petrowski, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your last name, my dear friend, and to all our elected officials who are here today, from the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, whether it be from different cities and parishes, to counties and the state. Welcome all to this wonderful ceremony that we are commemorating. We're celebrating the Hmong Lao Veterans Day today here in the great state of Wisconsin. Today is not just about the recognition of the passage of this legislation by our state legislature here in Wisconsin, but it's also a reflection to commemorate a secret group of people that much of our country and our people, the American people, don't know about, because it is still very highly classified, and the US federal government has just barely begun to release small, minute details about the Hmong SGU Army. And the SGU is abbreviation for the name that the Central Intelligence Agency designated to the Hmong, and it stands for the Special Guerrilla Units. And this special alliance, this special relationship between the Hmong and our country, the United States of America today, began in January of 1961. The Kennedy administration, at the authorization of President Kennedy himself, instructed the Central Intelligence Agency to formulate a plan, a scenario to counter communist aggression and contain the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. And somewhere in there, in those plans, the word Hmong came up. And the US government and the US officials had no clue who the Hmong were. But how did the US government and the US officials come across the Hmong? And the Hmong have established a reputation for themselves in Southeast Asia being very anti-communist, but are freedom-loving people. And our history dates all the way back to China, our ancestral homeland, where the Chinese didn't get along with us because they wanted supremacy over the Hmong, and the Hmong wouldn't have it. And so we fled China and into other parts and other regions of Southeast Asia, primarily Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, and Burma. And it was there, in French Indochina, the colony at that time under the administration of France, in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, did the Hmong establish a strong alliance with the French, fighting what would become Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh down the road, a couple of years later. And when Indochina, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos gained independence from France, they became independent countries. And again, the Hmong had to face aggression again. Whether we wanted war or not, it would come in one fashion or another to the Hmong. And the Hmong were hill tribes people. And they farmed on whatever land was available. And they stayed up in the highlands where they found peace until communism would knock at the Hmong people's door. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, it was then President Kennedy instructed the CIA to formulate a plan. And through the CIA, they sent a gentleman by the name of Colonel Belair to this remote, landlocked country of Laos to find not just the Hmong, but one particular man by the name of Vang Kao, who would become not just a general of the Hmong people, who we call our George Washington, but who would become a leader, leading a cornerstone in Hmong history and transforming Hmong lives forever. And what I mean by that, for the better. And so in 1961, this ironclad alliance was formed. It was forged in what we call the first contact, in accordance to US government dossier, on January 10th, 1961. And three simple ideas were birthed that day between Colonel Belair and my father. One was my father would lead the Hmong to rise in arms against the communist forces of North Vietnam and the Pathet Lao, which is the communist Lao faction in the Kingdom of Laos. And one of those goals was to disrupt the communist supply lines along the Ho Chi Minh Trail that the North Vietnamese and the Soviets and the Chinese carved up through Laos to bypass the DMZ, which our friends who served in South Vietnam know very well. So the Ho Chi Minh Trail was carved through Laos to bypass that and send supplies to fight our American brothers and allies in South Vietnam. Two was for the Hmong SGU to protect and defend strategic US military installation sites. And one shining example of that would be Lima Site 85. It was a United States Air Force covert military radar site perched up on a mountain called Pupati in the Kingdom of Laos, but it was approximately 160 miles just west of Hanoi. And it was established in 1966, but the North Vietnamese and the Soviet military advisors to the Communist force began to get suspicious. How were United States Air Force warplanes like the B-52s, the F-117s, the F-104s, and the F-4 Phantoms still flying over the skies of North Vietnam in bad weather? And they were still hitting and striking strategic military targets with precision. So the Soviets began to become suspicious, and then soon enough, this military site, Pupati, Lima Site 85 in Laos, became known to the Communist forces. And they began to launch a 3-month-long raid against Pupati. So up on this perch of Pupati, you had about 19 U.S. Air Force military personnel, and they were the only ones up there. But down in the ravine in the valley were the Hmong SGU, joined by some Lao Special Forces and Thai Paru from Thailand, Allied troops protecting Pupati. So the North Vietnamese would get very clever. Instead of fighting combat to combat, face to face, they dug holes underneath the ground, and they eventually sent commandos scaling up the side of this mountain and launching attacks from the top. And then in March of 1968, the North Vietnamese deployed 2 very old Soviet Antonov 2 biplanes, relics of the World War II and World War I. And they flew in all the way from Vietnam to Pupati. An American Huey helicopter, commanded by American forces, armed with AK-47s, managed to take down one of the fixed-wing Soviet-era aircraft from a helicopter. And that would go down in history as the first time a helicopter or a rotor wing were down a fixed-wing aircraft. History was made there. Unfortunately, Pupati was lost. And the end of Lima Site 85 came to an end. But out of that heroism also rose a young man from Hamburg, Pennsylvania, age 35, Chief Master Sergeant Richard Urquhart, was one of those of the 19 up on Lima Site. And before he tragically lost his life, he managed to save some of the wounded, his fellow comrades. Others were unable to be rescued. And when he was being loaded onto the helicopter, one of the last persons, the helicopter drew enemy gunfire, and he was hit and killed. His brother-in-arms, who he saved, eventually would be flown out to South Vietnam or Thailand, where they recovered, but they had to find the tragic news that their hero had lost his life in the process, among with many other Hmong soldiers protecting Pupati. But it did not go down in vain. 14 years later, after Chief Master Sergeant Richard Eckford died, his family was told that he was lost in a helicopter accident. It wasn't until 1998 did the U.S. government declassify the full story to his family, that he served in a covert operation directing U.S. warplanes and Allied warplanes over the skies of North Vietnam at Pupati. And he died with honor and bravery among many other people during that conflict. The United States government would award him, the Air Force, props. And in 2010, under reevaluation of the Obama administration, they would eventually award him at a ceremony posthumously given to him at the White House, the Medal of Honor. And that medal was accepted by his 3 sons. So as of recent, stories out of the Hmong SGU, what we're celebrating today, is not just the passage of the legislation, but everything that took place. And I know there's one more item that was the 3 main goals that the Hmong were set up to do. But let me remind all of us that no matter which city, which neighborhood, which community, which state we come from, we're all Americans today. And even though we may have our disagreements, our different ideological views, different philosophies, we all serve under one banner, and that is the Stars and Stripes. That is our freedom, that is our democracy, and that is our liberty. That the Hmong served a long time ago. And everywhere I go, I like to include in my statements and remarks, as a joke that is not a joke, that the Hmong became U.S. citizens way before they even arrived on U.S. shores. And that does hold true. And I say this today to remind all of us so that we can reflect that as we depart today, we may go about our own business of the day, the coming days of the weeks, that we may forget much, but let us not forget this day and our heroes, our veterans who fought under our banner, our flag. Old Glory, the Star-Spangled Banner, it has many different names, but it is our flag. It is us, it is you, it is I. It stands for freedom, and it is a symbol of freedom all around the world today, the greatest nation on earth. Item 3, that the Central Intelligence Agency and the administration of Washington, D.C. assigned to my father and Hmong SGU was to help rescue or save U.S. pilots who were intercepted, attacked, or shot down that were fortunate enough to parachute into Laos. And if they were fortunate enough to do that, the Hmong would still have to trek the forest, the jungles, the mountains, the hillsides, the enemy positions to get to those U.S. pilots. Many sacrificing their own lives in the process to save a few. Other U.S. pilots were not so fortunate and either fell into the hands of the enemies or lost their own lives. These were the 3 main tasks assigned to the Hmong, and the Hmong, about 300,000 total was the population of Hmong people in Laos at that time. And about 40,000 served in the army. And the numbers that we cannot account today, because it is almost literally impossible to account how many lost their lives. But for the Hmong, it was a huge toll. But it was a toll that would change our lives forever, because it was done in the name of freedom. And that was our key to the next step, which I'll get to in a bit. But going back to the U.S. pilots, right here in the state of Wisconsin, the Aviation Heritage Center of Wisconsin recently dedicated a T-28, which in U.S. Air Force standard, that's a trainer from the Korean War. But these were trainer aircraft that were converted into warplanes that trained Hmong pilots in Bangkok, Thailand, that were trained by U.S. Air Force pilots. And let me just read a name of a few gentlemen that were the U.S. military trainers to the Hmong pilots who taught them how to turn these trainer aircrafts into warplanes. Retired Colonel Gary Koldike, retired Major Mark Gunn, retired Captain Joe Bazine, retired Colonel Carl Polifka, and retired Captain Reverend Tim McKern are just a few testament to the legacy of the Hmong pilots. If you recall in my speech earlier, the Hmong before the war, we were an agricultural people. The men tended the farms, the women, the sons, the daughters would help. Then came the rise of General Vang Pao. And through his leadership, that's why we call him the George Washington of the Hmong people. He wasn't just a military commander. He used and seized that opportunity, as stated in the proclamation by the governor and read by our friend the senator. He used that leadership to build schools and hospitals. And in a moment's time, men who tended to the fields were flying fixed-wing aircraft. They learned how to fly planes before they knew how to drive a car. Can you imagine that, ladies and gentlemen? Women left the fields to become nurses and radio operators, and so on and so forth. And above all, they got to go to school under the leadership of General Vang, which was a privilege before that to the wealthy and the elites only. So these were some of the positive contributions that our U.S.-Hmong alliance enabled the Hmong to do, and that's why I call it a pillar or a cornerstone of Hmong history. And that is why we are also here today. Lionel Rosenblatt, who is in charge of Refugee International, who is a dear friend of all of ours, stated, and I quote, "If the United States owed gratitude to anyone in Southeast Asia, it would be the Hmong." Jerry Daniels, who was a CIA case officer, a very close friend of my dad, but he was the CIA attaché who was side by side with my father through thick and thin, stated that, before he passed, that I and other representatives of the U.S. government, to you the Hmong, that if you fight for us and we win, you all will be fine. But if you lose, we will take care of you. And that is precisely what happened. The United States of America became our new home. Men, women, children of all different walks of life from this mountainous, landlocked country of Laos came to America. And if my father were here today, as leader and as father of Hmong people, he would remind the Hmong people of our journey to get here today. And we should not take that for granted. He would say to all of us that we must continue to do our positive contributions back to society, which we are a thread or fabric of our societies in which we call home, to our communities, to our neighbors, to be law-abiding citizens, and to continue to work hard. Work hard, not just for the American dream, but for our cause of freedom. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I will end off my speech in Hmong because I know there are a lot of non-English speakers here, primarily the elders today. And it will resonate what I just said in English in Hmong.